what has happened in Iran, here in Iran, in the last 2 weeks, basically. We had the recently in the World Economic Forum, we had Scott Bessent, U.S. Treasury Secretary, talking about how they have done everything to collapse the Iranian currency and make, to push these people to bring this sort of suffering to the Iranian people, and then, somehow manipulate the situation in Iran. I was watching the protests, and the government was trying to communicate with the elites of the market, with the economists, to bring the tensions down. Then it came the protest coming. The protest turned into riots. They were burning, banks, somehow, fire trucks. A quarter of the ambulances here in a large city like Tehran were somehow destroyed, which was amazing to see. And you see a huge manipulation, not only inside the country. As I was watching what's going on in the mainstream media outside of Iran, you see the reality is totally different. They were preparing from outside for the United States or Israel to attack Iran. From your point of view, how did you find the whole case of these, unrest in Iran, protests, riots, and then America being moments away from attacking Iran?
Um, well, first of all, I was looking at it from the point of view of trying to get a clear understanding of the reality of what was going on. And, there were really two phases to this. There was the phase in June. And in that time, there was a surprise. It was a surprise, if you like, a surprise attack, because Trump had just announced that there was going to be negotiations with Iran 2 days later. The attack was on Friday, the 13th of June, and on Sunday, Witkoff and the team were supposed to be in Oman to renew negotiations with Iran. It was a deception. It was intended to put Iran off guard. And what happened then on that day was a surprise attack. This was different from what has happened now, but there were the insertion of small covert units into Iran. These were small units, cells rather than units, small cells, and they were equipped with attack drones and also strike anti-tank missiles. And their objective and their purpose was to try and destroy, though they were placed close to the early warning radars in Iran, the eyes and ears of the main radar system. Not, this was just the localized radar system, and they did destroy some of it, but it did take the IRGC aerospace people, I think, by surprise, because they didn't know. They were suddenly under attack and they didn't know where it was coming from. And then it took a few hours or best part of a day for them to realize that this attack was coming from within Iran, and people using, they were very close to the sites they were attacking. They were using, as I say, anti-tank weapons and small drones coming in a suitcase. It was smuggled in to Iran for this purpose. And it took a little time for them to realize, and then they took the remedial action of cutting off the internet. And that severed these cells from the data and targeting information which was being provided from the array of satellites that America has that produce, if you like, a simulated battlescape in the cloud, which they were transmitting data up to the moment, data of the positions of radar, Iranian radar, down to these cells for them to target. Well, the internet cutoff stopped that. Then the thing morphed into the, if you like, the second stage after the decapitation strike on the commanders and on the political leadership and the assassination of some scientists. And then it went into the second stage, which was what is called the 12-day war. I don't want to go into that beyond saying that after about 4 days, Israel asked Trump to agree and arrange a ceasefire because they were being attacked like they've never been attacked before, and their air defense systems were proving inadequate to protect Israel from the missile attack. Then, when we come to the present period, this period now that has just passed, this was a different sort of attack. This was a different surprise that was being organized. This was the insertion of trained rioters into Iran. Some of them were Kurds coming in who'd been trained either in Albania in the Kamsar or in Iraqi Kurdistan. I'm not quite sure which. And some of them were MEK that had been at the camp in Albania, where 3,000 MEK are under training by the CIA for precisely this sort of job. And then there were others that came in as well. These were organized and directed. They came in and they were told where to go and what to do. But their playbook was, I think, also somewhat unexpected, at least to me. Anyway, this was, you probably remember it, the famous tome, which was The Management of Savagery. I don't know who wrote it, but I am told it was possibly an Egyptian. But this was the ISIS manual of creating absolute fear and disruption in a society by unrestrained savagery, unrestrained violence. And this has been the ISIS, if you like, text that they have used throughout. And the aim of it was the violence was extreme, and the attacks were on things you wouldn't expect, on banks and mosques and all the elements of the state. And they attacked innocent Iranians as well, viciously and in a really brutal way. The images I've seen of some of these attacks, and it was all intended to convey the message of a complete sort of a crumbling, burning edifice of the Iranian state, that it was on fire, it was burning, it was coming apart, and everyone was fleeing the building. And that into this was supposed to come, as Netanyahu and the Israelis, I think, had persuaded Americans to come in that situation where the house was on fire and that people were fleeing out of it because of the danger that they felt, and the thing was just crumbling, the building crumbling as it burned. That it would be an easy job. They would, with a small military operation, they would come in, assist the rioters, and that the state would implode, collapse, and would be finished. And Iran would then be rather like Syria was after Mr. Assad left Syria. So they wanted to achieve, that was, from my perspective, what was the aim of it to be achieved. And it failed. And it failed, I believe, for a number of reasons. But the first of which, I think, was that again, Iran responded very quickly to cut off international telephones, to move from the international internet to an internal network, internet that was just served the government and those in Iran, but severed the links to the external world. But then, crucially, and this was the surprise that came to the Israelis and to the CIA, which they hadn't expected, the big surprise was the severing of the Starlink. I'm told some, you know perhaps better than me, but some 40,000 terminals have been smuggled into Iran. And this was the mechanism for directing this whole operation. They needed that and the internet to tell people where to go, how to operate, how to come together. And I think behind the scenes was also another plan, which was the balkanization of Iran. So the Kurdish element coming into Kermanshah province in Iran was being directed to set up a constitution and a structure for a separatist state inside Iran, and others too. I mean, I don't know if the Baluchis were doing this or not, but clearly this was part of the plan of Israel more than the United States. The United States was still thinking in terms of regime change, and that Reza Pahlavi would come in and take over. But that was never the Israeli plan. The Israeli plan was balkanization and the division of the state into ethnic weak components, just as we see has happened in Syria. But the Starlink really, after that, I think the turning point was about that Thursday or Friday of the previous week. And then the whole, if you like, the unrest just subsided almost totally within a day or two and was gone. And that came as a surprise. And the import of this was really quite important. And it has even been recognized by, Israelis. I mean, those that are professional and not propagandists. They looked at it and they said, well, look, according to the plan, but where was the defections by the political elites who from parliament defected and joined the protesters, who defected from the army, from the IRGC, from the Basij? Nobody. I mean, there was nothing of any substance. There was no real opposition in Iran, and there was no, if you like, fragmentation, fracturing of the structure of the state. The state emerged from this intact. And the Israelis now, pretty much in their intelligence assessments, admit that. I was writing today about things, and it was quoting Roland Bergman, who said the assessment was that the insurrection just didn't happen. It stopped, and it even goes on to say, the question is whether it was ever likely or whether it was ever going to succeed. I mean, saying, well, trying again isn't going to work. I mean, that's quite an important, analysis by the Israeli formal intelligence assessment of it. Whether that has percolated through to Washington sufficiently, that, of course, is a different question, because Washington is still stuck in very much in certain frameworks of thinking and certain frameworks of understanding of Iran. But I think just recently the outgoing head of Mossad went to see Trump, David Barnier. Of course, we don't know what he told him, but I suspect that Trump does know that it was a failure. Of course, they're trying to compensate for it now. I mean, there's the coping going on, and the coping is, well, of course, we didn't actually deploy lots and lots of forces to the area, and maybe now we're having to deploy lots of forces to the area because that was clearly a mistake. That was, we needed more to make it work, and we didn't have them on place. So it's really just, I think, more than anything, a coping mechanism, because the military experts, and I've quoted this in the article I wrote. The military experts who I respect, people like Will Scriver, and others who really know it, say, we've been again propagandized that a massive force is on its way to the region around Iran, and that there are ships and forces and missiles being. And he says, this is just, they say it's the largest force ever assembled in the Middle East since this war or that war. And he says this is just arrant nonsense. It's not true. At the most, the ships and the formations that are arriving offshore Iran, there would be plus or minus perhaps 350 Tomahawk missiles that could be fired from the ships, because they can't replace them once they're fired, because many of them have to go to port to be reloaded. And he says, 350 over Iran, the size of Iran, and with Iran's missile systems being dispersed right across the country, a country that's the size of Europe. I mean, 350 tomahawks, yes, they can do a certain amount of damage. Are they going to destroy Iran? No. So, is it a bit more, is this again more of a sort of coping mechanism to try and please Trump in case he decides that he wants to finish the job as the Israelis? But I think the things that are really important is that, I mean, Trump, I think, probably understands that the intelligence was flawed, that Iran was a house of cards, and just a simple push, this insurrection would topple it easily, and then a small force could, as Trump likes to say, in, boom, out, very quick, and finish, clean operation, and a big win, standout event. It's brilliant, but maybe that's not so easily had. It's not Venezuela. It's not going to be a sort of Maduro type of operation where a few Delta Force operatives come in and seize the president, and the next day he's in a court in New York. They're not. It's not going to happen like that. And even the Israelis admit that they didn't know they'd wanted to try and assassinate the supreme leader in an earlier round, but they couldn't find him. So this I think is where we are at the moment, in the chaos, in the sort of remaining chaos of Davos and Greenland and all the other distractions, and of Zelensky lecturing the Europeans on their deficiencies. After Howard Lutnick and Besant had also told the Europeans how useless they are. Not that I'm disagreeing with the thrust of his observations, but I'm saying that it was a crazy, crazy sort of period. But then, of course, we see what has happened on Greenland, what is left of NATO, what is the future of the European Union as it exists. All of these, it's a bit too early to say for sure, I mean, what is the meaning to all of it?
One of the important key points that you mentioned is the attempt, the endeavor on the part of the Israelis, together with this network of intelligence, to make some sort of fracture within the government, within the administration, within the leadership here in Iran. One was after the cut of the internet, they said that the Iranian government is using chemical weapons against the people here in Iran, the same strategy they have used in Syria against the Assad government with those false flag operations. And the other thing that was somehow amazing to me, that they said that Javad Zarif, the former foreign minister of Iran and the former vice president of Iran, is in contact with Reza Pahlavi, and he's giving his messages to Reza Pahlavi and giving and bringing some sort of messages from Reza Pahlavi to Rouhani. And do you think that we have been facing some sort of, all the experience from Maidan, from Ukraine 2014, then go to Georgia, then go to, Syria? It's a combination of all of them together, it seems to me.
Yes,
What is your understanding of that?
no, I think, that this has been long planned. That's been in the works for a long time. And we can see that from the fact that the people that were inserted, I mean, they knew exactly what to do. And they were directed to areas mostly in sort of small cities initially, where there would be crowds. And then they could ignite the crowds, and then there were people with guns and snipers who would fire at the security people. And the security people, I mean, there's a sort of myth in the world by people who have never been under fire that, you know where the shot is coming from. Oh, it's coming from up there. It's nonsense. By the time you hear the shot, the bullet is already in you or past you. I mean, you don't actually know where it's coming from. So, I mean, it was all an accumulation of the elements that were present. And it was focused, of course, first of all, on the economy and on the crashing of the real in Dubai. The short selling of the real set off a real emergency for the bazaris and for the merchant class, because their business, a few percent drop in the value of the real, one thing, but that huge drop, I think 40% or maybe even more, I mean, just eviscerated their business models. It wasn't that they were upset with the state per se, although they were certainly not happy with the economic management, the legacy of mismanagement of the economy, as they understand it in Iran. And indeed, I was quite puzzled why, it's very easy to organize a short selling raid on a currency. If you have money, I mean, enough money, you go in and you just sell and sell and sell, and you make money in the end of the day, because then you buy back later on. And I couldn't understand why there wasn't some arrangement, a swap agreement with China or something like that, that the government used to bring the currency back up to a level. I know there are, the foreign reserves of Iran, many of them are still frozen. But I mean, China's offered to give financial support. But it seems over this period, I don't know, I'm speaking in ignorance, but over this period, the successive governments have not, approached China and made those sort of arrangements that they're normal arrangements. Russia is often under currency attack, a short selling attack. Remember, at one point they'd actually taken it to such a limit that the value of oil actually went negative for a few days. So, I mean, and then, there are these arrangements between central banks. And, I can't understand why that happened, but it does remain a sort of vulnerability. I mean, I hope that perhaps Iran would call in the Chinese and say, please, sort out the economic the situation, because it's very difficult. Iran is going on with a mix of two quite contrasting and oppositional economic structures. On the one hand, during that earlier period, the Rouhani period, we went sort of neoliberal in Iran and tried to get rid of subsidies and sort of have a proper, as they would say, a market economy. But first of all, that is not something that is easy to do, because you can't just rip away, the floor to prices of flour and other key elements in the economy. And then the other part of it is a social economic structure, rather like there exists in China and in Russia, where it is not about individual businessmen making as much profit as they possibly can, but an economy that is geared, and its investment strategies geared to the community as a whole. Anyway, that's for Iran to sort out in when all of this passes over and have time to sort of rethink it. I don't know why it happened. I mean, perhaps there was a tension between people who looked east and people who looked west. But whatever it was, I mean, it certainly flagged up the fact that this is something that has to be addressed very seriously.